It was a normal and happy day until my son's wife handed me that envelope. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, watching her eyes avoid mine, her lips pressed into that polite little smile she wore whenever she wanted to seem respectful. Imagine waking up one day to realize that the people you love the most might be quietly plotting to take what's yours. It was strange how something as thin as paper could weigh heavier than grief itself. Hey, before we continue, please make sure you are already subscribed to this channel and write in the comments where are you watching from. It will be your love for me. My name is Laura, and I am 72 years old. Once, this house was my whole world. Every brick, every corner held a story, a heartbeat. But now, all that remains are fragments of what used to be. Memories I can't seem to let go of, no matter how hard I try. It began with a simple sentence that shattered my world. It's official now, Mom. You'll need to vacate with me. Days. Something in my chest tightened that day. Not from anger, from confusion. I didn't know what I had done wrong. Still, I told myself not to interfere. Let them have their space, I thought. Love grows best when it isn't crowded. Helping them find their 2-story house near the park, I felt like I was planting a new branch of my heart at a slight distance. On moving day, Melissa directed the movers with military precision, while Ethan trailed behind, half amused. I dusted shelves, folded quilts, arranged the kitchen jars. Simple gestures that felt like leaving pieces of myself behind. Returning home that evening, the house seemed too quiet for the first time in years. The weeks that followed were gentle but distant. Ethan came by to fix small things, and Melissa occasionally brought gifts or cookies. She was polite, careful, always measured, as if walls of invisible caution separated us. I convinced myself it was just adjustment, that love grows best when not forced. But subtle shifts began. Ethan called less. Melissa answered on his behalf with polished politeness. During an unannounced visit, carrying casserole and fresh bread, I found their house spotless, almost eerily perfect. Ethan's tired smile masked something I couldn't name. Melissa's words were clipped, rehearsed, and the warmth I remembered felt barricaded behind invisible walls. I left that day with a sense that something had shifted. The first overt sign of unease came weeks later. Ethan visited alone with fruit and marigolds. He hesitated, then suggested making official arrangements about the house, citing Melissa's desire for security. I laughed lightly, insisting that nothing more was needed. He was my son, and that was all the ownership that mattered. Yet a flicker of guilt or uncertainty crossed his eyes. That night, silence pressed heavily on the house, a foreboding weight I could not yet name. A month of quiet followed, with no calls or visits. The marigolds Ethan had brought dried and curled into brittle reminders. Then, one morning, a car stopped outside. Melissa appeared at the gate, folder in hand. Before she knocked, I opened the door. Her smile was tight, deliberate. "Mom, I just needed to drop something off. It's from the lawyer, about the property." My heart skipped. She returned to the car and drove away, leaving me with the envelope on the table, a silent dare. A storm brewing in the calm. Little did I know, that envelope was not just paper. It was the first strike in a war I never expected to fight. A war that would turn my own home into a battlefield. People you trusted most, the ones you loved beyond measure, suddenly turned on you, stripping away everything you thought was yours. The envelope sat on my table like a dead weight, mocking me with its calm, pale surface. Hours passed, and I couldn't touch it. My hands shook every time I glanced at it. I told myself I was imagining things, that it might be a routine letter, a simple legal formality. But beneath that rationality, a cold terror had already planted itself deep in my chest. Finally, with trembling hands, I tore it open. The words inside hit me like a physical blow. Notice of eviction, 30 days to vacate. My heart froze. This house, the walls that held decades of memories, the garden my late husband and I had nurtured, the very place my soul had called home, was no longer mine. The second page revealed the truth I couldn't escape. Ethan's signature. My son, the boy I had raised, nurtured, and protected, had signed my life away. I sank into the chair, paper quivering in my hands, whispering in disbelief. No, this can't be real. Every sound in the house seemed alien. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the laughter of children playing outside. The world moved on, oblivious to the devastation that had erupted in my life. But for me, time had stopped. Night came, heavy and unyielding. I stared at the ceiling, haunted by the betrayal. How had this happened? Ethan had always been my anchor, my heart. Yet somehow, the home I had safeguarded for him became a weapon against me. At dawn, I folded the papers and tucked them back into the envelope, making a silent promise. I needed answers, not from lawyers, from my son. I drove to their house early, mist curling along the street like a ghost of the life I once knew. Ethan wasn't home, but Melissa's car waited, pristine. I stepped onto their porch, heart pounding, clutching the envelope like proof of a crime. She opened the door as if expecting me, her smile polite and cruelly calm. "It's exactly what it says," she said. "We're taking over the property. Ethan signed the transfer months ago. The lawyer finalized it today." I couldn't speak. Her casual declaration of ours felt like knives twisting in my chest. She insisted I move somewhere smaller, more manageable, offering help as if exile could be packaged with kindness. I wanted to scream, to plead, to make her understand that this house wasn't just bricks and walls. It was my life, my memories, my husband's legacy. Ethan came home that evening. His eyes were red, his hands trembling, but his words were weak excuses. He claimed he trusted her to handle the legalities, that it was meant to simplify things, and in trusting her, he had handed over our home. My son, the boy who once held my hand across the street, was now a stranger on the opposite side. My heart fractured quietly, painfully, as I realized the man before me had chosen her over me. After he left, silence engulfed the house. I stared at the eviction notice, tears silently burning. Love papers couldn't protect me, I whispered, a chill crawling down my spine. But even in the betrayal, I found resolve. I would fight, not with anger, but with dignity, with every ounce of strength left in me. My home had been stolen, my trust shattered, but this was only the beginning, and I would rise, no matter the cost. What would you do when the sanctuary you built with love is threatened, and the people you trusted most stand on the opposite side? The morning after the storm of betrayal, I awoke before dawn, heart heavy and mind foggy. For a fleeting moment, I thought it was just another ordinary day. Coffee brewing as usual, 2 scoops, 1 sugar. until my eyes landed on the drawer holding the eviction notice. The betrayal, the signature, the silence, it all rushed back like a wave, leaving me breathless. I made a promise. That afternoon, trembling slightly, I boarded the bus into town. My old car had been idle for weeks. I didn't trust myself behind the wheel. The legal office I found was small and tucked between a barber shop and a bakery, the air tinged with coffee and paper. A young receptionist led me to Mr. Brooks, a seasoned attorney whose eyes were sharp but kind. I handed him the envelope. "Someone's trying to take my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He read the papers, brows knitting. "Did you ever sign a transfer deed?" he asked. I shook my head. The words he spoke next hit me like ice. My son's legal authority over the property allowed him to transfer ownership, effectively handing the house to his wife. Legally, she now owned it, unless coercion or fraud could be proven. The sting of my own naivety cut deep. I had trusted love more than the law. But Mr. Brooks offered a glimmer. Old records, utility bills, and correspondence could form the backbone of a case. A new resolve kindled in me. I would gather every fragment of proof. That night, I sifted through drawers and boxes, dust motes dancing in the flashlight beam. Mortgage papers, faded photos of us painting the living room, roof receipts, bank congratulatory notes. Each item was a fragment of my life, of love and sacrifice, now transformed into evidence. Anger sharpened into clarity. They might have stolen my trust, but they would not take my dignity quietly. A few days later, Ethan arrived late one evening. Exhausted, eyes shadowed, he tried to reason, explaining he hadn't intended harm, and thought the documents were harmless joint ownership forms. My voice trembled as I confronted him. Meaning well doesn't undo harm. He had trusted someone who saw what I had and took it, and he had enabled it. Guilt shadowed his features, but his apologies could not erase the fracture. I told him I wasn't fighting for revenge, but for truth, for what was rightfully mine, and that he had to choose where he stood. His silence spoke volumes. 2 weeks later, Mr. Brooks filed the preliminary paperwork. Melissa's lawyer responded coldly, dripping with condescension, claiming I had no legal claim. Reading those words, I realized she wasn't afraid. She believed I'd fold. But as I sat at the kitchen table, candlelight flickering across walls I had painted and memories I had lived, I found clarity. This house was more than bricks. It was identity, history, life itself. Even if I had to walk away one day, I would not do so in shame. Ethan called again, quietly admitting he saw what Melissa had done, but unsure how to fix it. I closed my eyes, tears slipping silently. "Sometimes," I said softly, "you can't fix what's broken. You can only choose what you become after it breaks." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept, not because the battle was over, but because I finally understood who I was fighting for. Not the house, not revenge, but my self-respect. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, I felt the fire of my own strength, and I knew I would face the next wave standing tall, unbroken. The week following the eviction notice felt surreal. Pain travels faster than joy, and soon neighbors began stopping by under the guise of concern, carrying casseroles and questions that hovered on the edge of propriety. Everyone seemed to know something had fractured between me and my son, though I shared nothing. I smiled politely, brushing off their curiosity with gentle words. "You know how families are. Sometimes love gets tangled with misunderstanding. Inside, though, I was unraveling. That Sunday, I returned to church for the first time since the ordeal began. Sitting in the familiar back pew, the polished wood cool beneath my palms, I let the music of the organ wash over me. Pastor Miller paused as he walked past, placing a hand on mine without a word. "God sees the truth before anyone else does," he whispered. For the first time in days, I allowed my tears to fall freely, letting them carry away some of the grief that had weighed me down. Days later, I received a call from my sister Linda. She'd seen Emma, my daughter-in-law, loudly spinning her version of the story at the grocery store. I had tried to take their house, and she was only protecting her family. My hands clenched around the phone. Protecting her family from me, the same woman who once labored through sleepless nights stitching her wedding dress, now portrayed me as the villain. The betrayal cut deep, a rewriting of my place in the world that left me trembling with quiet fury. That evening, Ethan arrived alone. His knock was soft, familiar, like the boy who once forgot his key and waited patiently at the door. He looked older, thinner, worn down by sleepless nights and guilt. Sitting across from me at the dining table, the one we'd once shared Sunday pancakes on, the space between us was heavy with unspoken words. "I didn't know she was going to do that," he whispered. I waited, letting the silence stretch before asking the question that had burned inside me. "Didn't know or didn't want to know?" He lowered his eyes. "She told me you were planning to sell the house, that you didn't want us here anymore." "And you believed her?" I asked, voice trembling yet steady. He nodded. "I saw the papers at the lawyer's office. The lease, it's in her name, not mine." The truth was out. Hearing it directly from his lips broke something inside me I hadn't realized was still whole. "She said she did it for us," he continued quietly. "To protect me, to keep things simple. But now, I think she just wanted control." I stayed silent, because no words of mine could undo what had been done. After a long pause, I said softly, "Sometimes love blinds us. We stop asking questions because we're afraid of the answers." He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my little boy again. The one who had cried over scraped knees, now facing a wound far larger than he could have imagined. A few days later, I learned that Ethan had quietly started the legal process to remove Emma's name from the lease. Though she would resist, he had begun to reclaim what was rightfully ours. And even amidst the whispers of neighbors and pitying glances from friends, I carried myself with quiet dignity, knowing that some battles were fought not for revenge, but for the integrity of the heart. Months passed, court dates arrived, and letters exchanged hands. I began packing, teacups, framed photos, quilts, wrapping each memory carefully. Not because I had to, but because I chose to leave on my own terms. Ethan tried to stop me. "Mom, you don't have to go," he said. I smiled, hands trembling. "No, sweetheart. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be learned from." That night, surrounded by half-filled boxes, the moonlight spilling across the floor, I felt peace. A peace born not of possession, but of acceptance. Whispering to the walls that had held our laughter, I said, "Thank you for sheltering me." What does it mean to start over when your past has been stolen? And yet, somehow, life offers you a second chance. The move to a small cottage on the edge of town felt like stepping into a new life. 2 rooms, a creaky porch, and a patch of sunlight-dappled garden. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No shared walls, no whispers, no unexpected footsteps. Just honest, healing silence. At first, the quiet felt strange. I had grown accustomed to the faint hum of family life, the laughter, the clatter of dishes. Now it was just the wind through the trees and the sound of my own breath, reminding me of all I had endured. I began to fill my days with small, grounding routines. Morning walks to the corner cafe, a cup of coffee paired with a slice of blueberry pie, an indulgence I had never allowed myself while cooking for everyone else. Afternoons were spent at the library, where the librarian greeted me with warmth that felt like a quiet reassurance, a reminder that life could still be kind. My son called frequently, his voice softer, cautious, carrying unspoken apologies. Sometimes he asked about my settling in. Sometimes we simply sat in silence over the phone, listening to one another breathe. "I saw the garden," he said one day. "You're planting roses again?" "I am," I replied. "Some things still deserve to bloom." The pause that followed, the subtle hitch in his breath, told me he understood more than he could yet express. Then one afternoon, a knock came at the door. Emma stood there, no longer smug, but hollow, her eyes carrying exhaustion and the weight of her own choices. She offered an envelope containing a partial reimbursement check, her hands trembling. I handed it back gently. "I don't want your money," I said softly. She admitted she needed to do this for herself. In that moment, I saw her not as a villain, but as a frightened woman who had clung too tightly to control. "You don't fix broken trust with money," I told her. "You fix it with truth." Tears filled her eyes. "You were right about everything," she admitted before leaving. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her own reckoning. A week later, my son visited. Standing on my porch, his hands in his pockets, he looked older, burdened with remorse. "I filed for separation," he said quietly. "I can't stay with someone who uses love like a weapon. I want to start over, Mom. I want to do better." Relief swelled in my chest. I reached for his hand. Starting over doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. Understanding what I had always meant. Love without respect isn't love at all. The days that followed were softer. I tended my garden in the mornings, volunteered at the library in the afternoons, and watched sunsets from my porch in the evenings. Children waved as they passed. Neighbors offered small kindnesses, and occasionally, my son brought me groceries or a potted plant, silently bridging the gap that words couldn't yet heal. The silence between us had transformed. It was no longer empty, but peaceful. One evening, trimming the roses, I breathed in the scent of rain-soaked earth. The first storm of the season rolled in, and for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything. No forgiveness, no justice, no closure. I had already found it. Not in courtrooms, not in papers, but in the quiet certainty that I had walked through betrayal and emerged capable of love. Healing isn't victory. It's the quiet strength of a heart that chooses peace, love, and dignity, even after everything has been lost. A year had passed since the eviction, and life had quietly moved on. But I found myself walking past the old house, drawn by memories I thought I had left behind. The house looked different. Emma had moved out months ago, and my son was living there alone. The paint had faded. The flower beds I once tended were overgrown with weeds, yet the porch light still glowed its familiar soft yellow, like a small beacon of memory. I lingered at the end of the driveway, inhaling the scent of rain-soaked earth, letting nostalgia wash over me. That house had witnessed so much, laughter, arguments, quiet dinners, and nights spent waiting for him to return safely. Now it was just a structure, walls and windows containing memories that no longer belonged to me. And yet, I smiled. I had stopped needing it to be mine. Some things, I realized, are outgrown, not out of bitterness, but because peace fits better than possession. Later that evening, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name, penned in my son's handwriting. Inside, a short note. "Mom, I've decided to sell the house. I want to use the money to start over somewhere new. Somewhere I can build a life that feels right again. I thought I'd feel guilty, but I don't. Not anymore. You taught me that letting go isn't the same as giving up. Thank you for standing tall when I couldn't. I love you." I sat on my porch long after reading it, the paper trembling in my hands, the sun setting like a slow exhale. I whispered to the wind, "You finally learned what love really means. Love isn't about holding on tighter. It's about knowing when to release." And for the first time in months, I felt completely free. In the weeks that followed, I began hosting small dinners at the cottage. Friends brought pies, neighbors brought laughter, and we sat under string lights I'd hung across the porch. Occasionally, my son would stop by, helping carry chairs, greeting everyone with the warmth that had always been part of him. One night, after everyone had left, he stayed behind. "You look happy here," he said softly. "I am," I replied. When he asked if I ever missed the old house, I shook my head. I miss what it meant, not what it became. He nodded, understanding without words. I spent evenings outside, wrapped in an old shawl, listening to crickets and watching the moonlight illuminate my roses, stronger, fuller, bolder than before. Healing, I realized, works the same way. Cut back the dead parts, nurture what's left, and wait for the sun to find you again. The home I had lost was only a symbol. The home I discovered inside myself could never be taken. A few weeks later, a young widow from church called, asking how I had found peace. I told her, I stopped trying to hold the pieces together the way they used to be. I learned to build something new with what was left. She cried softly on the phone, and I realized my story wasn't meant to end with loss. It was meant to help others find themselves. Now, every Sunday, I host the Porch Talks, small gatherings where people with broken marriages or fractured families share stories of loss and resilience. Every time I tell mine, the eviction, the betrayal, the silence, the healing, I end it the same way. Sometimes you have to lose a roof to find peace under the open sky. Pain doesn't destroy us. It clears the space where peace can finally settle. Even now, years later, I can feel the weight of that eviction notice in my hands. The crisp paper, the blue ink smudged from my tears, the trembling that came not from the paper itself, but from what it meant. It was more than an eviction. It was a line drawn in ink between love and betrayal. It was the day I realized that even family could forget your worth if you allowed it. But looking back now, I don't see it as the day I lost everything. I see it as the day I began learning who I was without everything. Because sometimes God doesn't remove people from your life to hurt you. He moves them because He knows you wouldn't leave otherwise. He knows that peace cannot coexist with pride that needs feeding. That eviction was a push I didn't know I needed, a painful lesson disguised as betrayal. Betrayal from your own, a son, a daughter, a spouse, sits deep. It doesn't fade overnight, but it changes you in ways you don't expect. You start listening more quietly. You speak more gently. You stop fighting for spaces where love feels like a negotiation. And maybe that's the real miracle of pain. It teaches you what not to return to. Every morning now, I water my roses. Some bloom in colors I never planted, vivid, unrestrained, alive. Perhaps they were wild seeds carried by the wind, or perhaps they were just grace returning home. Either way, they remind me that growth doesn't ask for permission. It happens quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. I've learned that letting go doesn't always feel like victory at first. Sometimes it feels like leaving a part of yourself behind. But with time, that act becomes the truest form of courage. I left the house, yes, but I kept my dignity, my memories, and most importantly, the capacity to love without fear. When people ask me what happened, I tell them simply, my son's wife handed me an eviction notice, but life handed me something better, freedom. Not freedom from a house, but freedom in my heart. Freedom in knowing that I was enough, that I had loved fully, and that I could keep walking forward without bitterness. So now, dear listener, remember this. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't in winning battles, but in standing tall when the world tries to take everything from you. If you've ever had to let go of something you loved, not because you wanted to, but because keeping it was hurting you, and sometimes the hardest part is also the most freeing, would you have stayed and fought, or walked away with your dignity intact?
Share your heart in the comments.